All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Well Society podcast. Today, we are continuing with our Refiner's Fire series, and I have a wonderful woman from the big state of Texas on the call with us today, Mrs. Elaine Mingus. And Elaine is a vintage furniture reseller. She likes to think of herself as a fixer of broken things or as someone who gives value to the unvalued. When she started picking up discarded items on the side of the road as a way to pay off debt for her large family of 9, she could have never imagined she would not only pay off debt, but would turn it into a six-figure business. After years of gathering, repairing, restoring unwanted items, she realized there was a deeper meaning in her work, a message for everyone who ever felt forgotten or broken, a message of hope that everyone has value, but sometimes it takes someone else to find us, dust us off, and restore us to wholeness. Her mission is to tell her story, offer practical business advice to entrepreneurs, and encourage everyone to become the person they were always created to be. So, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I also have to throw out there that Elaine is running for the Mrs. Texas pageant. It's going to be in April of 2023. So, we are really excited for you.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a whole story into itself, and it is just I'm along for the ride myself. So we'll see where it all goes.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. All right, so we like to just jump right in and start sharing with our listeners the meat of the story. So, share with us a little bit about. We in your bio it talks a lot about furniture, but that's not really the direction we're going to be going in today. It's going to take a different twist. So, talk to us about lead us to life before you went into a refiner's fire.
So I grew up in a well-to-do family in a small Texas town right outside of Houston. And my father had moved us to this small Texas town so that we would stay out of trouble. We immediately kind of got plugged into this church, and I was going to youth group events, and specifically I remember going to the Dawson McAllister's conference that was like about Jesus coming back, and I was just enamored with that story. And but during that time I was about 10. We moved there when I was 10, so I was like 10, 11, 12, and I was involved in these youth group. Well, there was an assistant youth pastor that was there, and he was very handsome. And during that time he was grooming not only me but a couple other young girls in the youth group. And what was supposed to be a protective position eventually became into a pariah situation where he was taking me and using me for his own sexual benefit. And I was very, very young, and I just, thought that he liked me and didn't really understand the implications of what was going on. And so that was a something I dealt with very young. And when what people don't understand about grooming is that it's not like sexual assault that happens in the movies. It's like this slow fade of like them gaining your trust and then using that trust against you to make you feel loved and wanted in sexual ways that you weren't supposed to be. Like, that wasn't what I was looking for. He specifically used my relationship with my father, and which, any 11-year-old can attest that you're going through hormones and puberty, and your parents are, not the smartest people in your book. And so he used that like loneliness and that like place where me and my dad were just kind of distancing from each other during that time against me so that he could kind of come in and fill that position in a very deviant way. And so at some point, my dad actually found out that this was occurring. And, like any good parent, my mom and my dad, tried to address the situation in the best way they knew how. My mom took me into the church, and during that session when we were talking to the main pastor, I was accused of seducing this man who was a grown man, and I was 11, and that was like really horrifying for me because was I felt very rejected, and I didn't understand like that he would like not, that he was like, I didn't realize how wrong it was. And so I thought like, here is this guy that like I thought he cared about me, and he's totally rejecting me and then throwing me under the bus over here. And it wasn't until later that I realized that like how awful the situation was because I was so young. And then later on it became even more apparent that he like his deviant behavior, because he was later found guilty of doing it to quite a few other girls in a leadership position he held at a Christian academy. And so through that experience, I got really depressed. And my mom, I remember her always telling me, I always felt like I was scraping you off the floor. And now this is like the early 90s. So like Kate Moss and Calvin Klein underwear were like the big thing. And like that waifish, Twiggy look was very popular. And I was not Twiggy. So I started turning to bulimia to kind of cope with some of the pain that was going on in my life. And then eventually turned into drug usage and going, crazy kind of sexually, and just getting into anything I could that would kind of ease the pain of what had happened when I was 11.
So when did this start to um, process for you where you started to step into some of these behaviors that you're explaining?
So when I was 11, after that situation, I became bulimic, and I was bulimic for 8 years until I became a Christian. But the I think it was around I was kind of experimenting, because it's a slow, you're going and you're experimenting, you're trying to figure out like who you are as an 11-year-old. I mean, it's such a pivotal time. And at around 15, when I entered in high school, that's really when I was introduced to the wrong people, started smoking, started drinking, started doing drugs, started selling drugs. And then when I moved to Austin for university, got into, shooting up heroin, shooting up coke. And the strange thing is that because I'm such a high performer, no one could really ever pinpoint what was exactly wrong. They knew I was too thin. They knew I was doing drugs. No one knew to the extent because I was, lettering and cross country. I was great, graduating in 3 years with a, 4.0 GPA and National Honor Society. And so, I was just, I mean, I'm the type of person that when I go in, I go all in, and it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. I'm just, all the way in. And so that's kind of like the story up until I became a Christian.
Yeah, so it's being groomed, going through that experience, and then there's like a 4-year gap before your emotional responses kind of catch up and you start to figure out really what was happening. And yeah, I get that. The masking of the pain, the not wanting anybody to know, and so I'm just going to mask it myself and just do all the things to distract from what's really happening. And a lot of women do that with different traumas in their life or with, you know, just different things that happen. And sometimes our high achieving gets warped and morphed into, I just don't want to deal with these horrible things that have happened in my life. So tell me about how you came to know Jesus.
So I remember when I was younger and I was dealing with bulimia, I prayed, Lord, when I turn 16, I promise I'll tell someone. And then 16 rolls around and I can't tell anybody. I'm too wrapped up in the you know, I'm too wrapped up, I'm too committed, and I'm scared at this point. And so I just kept it, keeping on. And I knew what I was doing was wrong. And my family, after the whole church thing kind of disintegrated, we stopped going to the church, obviously. And my parents were fighting. They weren't doing so well. And so I kind of felt, because I'd been blamed for this other situation, I kind of felt responsible for the depreciation of my parents' marriage on top of that. It wasn't until recently that my sister was like, you do know that you were not the reason why they got divorced. And it's like, it's really taken a lot of work inside myself to really believe that in my heart of hearts. So all that pain just kept compounding along with some other issues. I, I got pregnant when I was 16. And so when I went into university and I was 19, I remember just, wanting to be something better, wanting to be something great, and knew I had so much more to offer the world, but I just, you're just living life. You're just trying to have fun. And like I said before, I had gone to this Dawson McAllister conference and had really learned about like Left Behind type of stuff. And we watched this really crazy 1970s Thief in the Night movie that like was just so bizarre, but just really stuck with me. And I'm a writer, and that's what I went to school for. I went to school for journalism. And so I was writing this fictional book based on kind of like end times stuff, and decided, well, I need to do what good writers do, just research. And I don't have my little, so I decided, well, I'll go to this church. They're like obligated to give me a Bible because I don't want to pay for it. And so I am like literally dressed like the bride of Satan. I have a black tutu, and it is like a bride to like it's full on skirt, and I have this leather bodice on, and I've taken a piece of the like black tulle and like cut a veil out and like attached to this like headband. And I've got this blood red lipstick on. So I literally walk into this church looking like the bride of Satan. And these two little old ladies probably looked at me and was like, what is going on? And so I said, well, Bible. And I'm thinking now they must have been like, I don't want to leave you alone with her. And they probably like went back there and prayed for me, because while they were back there, I went up to the chapel doors and I like shook them and they were locked. And I was thinking, that's absolutely sacrilegious. Like, you cannot lock chapel doors. Like, that's just, why would you do that? And so when they came out, they handed me the Bible and I said, can I go into the chapel? And they said, well, why do you need to go in the chapel? And I said, like, from the like inside of who I was just like, I need to pray. Like, just guttural, like something just pushed me to say, I have to get in because I have to pray. And when they opened up, I mean, it's almost like movie like when they open up the doors, like I just see this like beautiful wood crucifix of Jesus. And the moment that I saw that, I knew I was home. And it was a lot like the song Amazing Grace. It says, the moment that my sins, like I realized that my sins were revealed, I knew that they also had been forgiven. And so I just immediately just started weeping. I stayed in there for 2 hours praying. Back up a little bit. I was tripping on ecstasy this whole time as well. So I, so on top of all of that, like I am, and actually the ecstasy didn't really like take effect. So that was like kind of a God thing too. So it was like I had taken it, but I didn't really, I had taken ecstasy before, and this was either just I was sold a bad bunch or just God like tapped it down, because I was really, coherent that whole time. And I remember going after that to the little coffee shops in Austin. This was pre-Starbucks. So there was all these like ma pa coffee shops downtown. And I was like trying to tell people like what had happened. I was like, have y'all met Jesus? And they were like, they wanted nothing to do with what I was talking about. And I was like, no, 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 no. You don't understand. Like, not the church Jesus. Like, I knew the church Jesus, but like this Jesus that like just came down from heaven and had like a whole experience with me. And they still just did not want to hear it. So I found this homeless guy and we sat in a field and talked for hours about Jesus. And he was like, there's a Bible verse that talks about like the lowly and meek, that they get to see God. And he was just like, I see God all the time. Like he shows up on a regular basis. And I was just like, these are my people. And so from that moment, like the Bible says, those that are in a great darkness will see a great light. Like from that moment on, like my entire life changed. I was heroin addict. I never had desire for heroin again. I did struggle. I had to give up cigarettes by myself, which was probably one of the harder things. Had to give up smoking pot. Um, the craziest things, a drug, when you're a drug user, you always wish to find drugs like randomly. I found so many drugs randomly, like that I had forgotten in my apartment, or like I would open my car door and there'd be a bag of weed right by so I had to like overcome all these temptations. And I remember thinking, making decisions like I'm holding this bag of weed. It's like it's right by my car door. Like I step out and it's right there. And I'm like having to like hold it over the toilet and like dump it into the toilet along with, any cocaine I found. And so there's just these small moments in my life that where you're like, I am committed. I am doing this. All the other things don't even compare to the truth that I've been given.
That's an amazing testimony. You go in like your darkest of dark, dressed as the bride Satan, and then come out with this totally transformative life. And the guiding scripture for the Well Society is all about the woman at the well and how she was the least likely from the world standard for the Lord to come to, for Jesus to come to and say, I am here. But he chose her. He chose her in all her brokenness and all her sinful ways, because she was full of sin. She had a lot of sin going on, but he chose her and he picked her and she changed her life around. And that your story reminds me a lot of that woman at the well. It's almost like, and I just did a live about this. It's we get in these cycles and we get stuck in addiction or our thoughts or our habits that we have, and we don't see a way out. We just get so fixated on, I know this isn't right. Because I mean, you were a very bright person. You knew this wasn't the path you needed to be on, but you didn't know how to get out of it, and it was just so comfortable. So let me just stay in this cesspool that's going to lead to disease, death, and destruction, because I don't know how to get out of it, and I don't have the energy to get out of it, and this is just comfortable. But the Lord showed you the way out, and you made the choice to choose that way out. Which I think is beautiful. So what is life like for you now on the other side?
So after I became a Christian, I had to make those decisions. I had to cut off relationships that were, toxic for this new life that I was living. And I went to a non-denominational church here in the Austin, Texas area and started volunteering for the TV ministry and met my husband through this ministry, and we got married. I was 22 when we got married and just immediately started having kids. And we didn't know we were going to have such a big family, but we did. And we have 7 now, ages from 5 years old to 19. And we decided to homeschool them. That is a whole thing. Like I did not have desire to homeschool my children. I wanted to be a writer, live in New York. I had gotten a prestigious internship with Self Magazine that I turned down because it wasn't the right time. And looking back, that was probably also another pivotal moment that I chose family over work. And that just really kind of defined our entire marriage. And so I stayed at home for a long period of time, and my husband was doing videography, and we struggled financially quite a bit during those times because we had so many kids. and we didn't have two incomes. And so, but it was just a really great, it was a great learning and growing experience for me, because there's so much, through my eating disorder like when I went through eating disorder therapy right after I became a Christian, and was the moment that I signed the papers for the intake, for the outpatient clinic. I never threw up again. The Lord, like, just miraculously delivered me from that. And but even through all my pregnancies, healing came with each and every pregnancy, because there's such a, I mean, you're gaining weight, and this is scary for someone who has an intense fear of gaining weight. And so the Lord just continued to just peel off those layers that of hurt and pain, and continues even today, healing issues that I have. And I don't think that, we talk a lot about like initial healing that's done, when the big thing goes away. But when the adrenaline of having children wears off, I think that also something that needs to be addressed is what happens when you're like, okay, now I'm like done having kids, and now I'm like re-entering kind of this like self-discovery phase in your 40s. And some of those things that maybe weren't, you know, dealt with back in your 20s because you started having kids or whatever, uh, kind of can resurface. And so I've even had to deal with like residual things that from my sexual trauma, from my eating disorder, that, have kind of thrown me for a loop in my 40s, because I just wasn't prepared to kind of readdress these issues. And so, but the Lord has been so good and just continues to heal me. And I continue to have just, I'm just constantly in awe that He, like when you look at a diamond in the light, like just the facets and the shining and the shimmering that happens. And it's like, I know how we can sit for eternity and praise God, because just every single time that something new happens in my life, I'm like, and there's another reason to be so thankful for this, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So that is my life. And so you know, we struggled financially for a little bit, for a long time, probably for 18 years of our marriage. And right before the pandemic, we kind of were at a place where we felt like we could take a vacation. Now, we had taken vacations, like small little, like 1 day vacations, camping, stuff like that. But we had never taken like a flying vacation with our family, because there's so many of us, and a plane ticket is $400. And so, but my daughter was fixing to graduate, and we were like, well, we've got to do it now, because we're not ever going to be necessarily in the same house again. And so I said one day, I said, let's go to Hawaii. And my husband, who never says yes, said, sure. And I was like, okay, I'm planning this trip. And like, I mean, I did it on the, I'm such a budget person. I'm such a like deal finder. Like, as a mom of seven, like one of my big things is like nothing goes to waste. Like every single dollar is counted. And so we planned this trip to Hawaii, and it still put us into about $10,000 worth of debt after plane tickets and eating and stuff like that. And so I came back from that after working so hard, because we had been financially so unstable, working hard to be out of debt and constantly be out of debt, and then coming back to go, oh my goodness, I just put my family in debt, like, and I felt really responsible for that. Even though we all went, but you take that on as a mom. And I got really, really depressed after that. And I always tell my kids, like, don't, be careful when you come back from vacation. Like, you're going to experience like a sense of depression, because like you are not having like this something to look forward to. But so my vacation depression kind of turned into a real depression, and I sunk really low. And I remember listening to Lauren Daigle's Rescue Me at that time on repeat, like over and over. It's like, I will find you in the middle of the night. I'm going to rescue you. I'm going to, send out an army. And I said, Lord, I need you to send out an army. I am really at a low place. I don't know what to do. I've given up. I just decided kind of like the blogging was not going to be what I wanted to do. And so I, along with some other things, that happened. And one day I saw a piece of furniture, a really nice piece of furniture on the side of the road. And I thought, I don't really need that. And like, it's hours before the trash truck comes and no one is picking it up and it's going to end up in the landfill. So I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to clean it up and I'm going to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. And through that kind of selling, but finding things and going out right before the trash truck came, I was able to pay off $10,000 worth of debt to take our family, to pay for that vacation. But not only that, I was able to buy a pop-up camper so we could take cheaper family vacations and camping wouldn't be so horrible because you know how camping is when it rains. It's like, everybody's in a tent and sopping wet. And then I paid off my daughter's braces in cash because we've got 7 kids. So we've got 7 sets of braces we're going to have to pay for. And I found such a sense of pride when I was able to like pay cash for, when I went to the grocery store. And what I didn't know then was that the Lord had set me up perfectly before COVID happened to really flourish during COVID. Because when COVID happened, my husband, who was in videography, which is events based, got laid off or furloughed. And we were able to continue to bring in money because people were stuck at home. They were redoing their homes. They were, throwing stuff out on the side of the road because all the thrift stores, all the donation places were closed. And then the trash truck was picking it up. And so I thought, well, I was already doing it. So I'm picking it up in like droves. And Venmo is, Facebook Marketplace and Venmo are a thing, and they really became a thing then because I was doing contactless porch pickup. I'd sanitize it, put it on the porch. They'd slip either cash or they'd Venmo me. And so during a time when like most of the world was really unstable in their job situation, we were the most that ever had during that. And so then after COVID, we decided to kind of step into that role a little bit. And some other things happened where we kind of pivoted to vintage furniture and realized that was where what was actually going to make more money. Cause I was selling like igloo coolers, Sterilite containers. I mean, it was playpens, whatever I could find on the side of the road, like artificial trees, whatever it was. And that was great, but it was like, it was $20 here, $40 here. And so when I scored this big storage unit full of vintage furniture for $50, it was just, honestly, it was a God thing. And that was one of the things that I learned too, is I had worked so hard at my blog and trying to build that when I stepped into, like when God put me into vintage furniture, the ease that occurred was so much more than when I was doing, like when I was spinning my own plates doing my blogging. And so through that, I built up a following. And this in 2022, we decided to start an e-commerce business, and it's called Curb Vulture. And because it's kind of a nod to me picking up furniture on the curb. And within the first year, we were able to clear 6 figures and just totally catapults our family into a whole nother financial place than we'd ever been able to do. And the Lord just has opened up doors that I just didn't even know were available to me. And one of them being running for Mrs. Texas. And that the crazy thing is that the very thing that I was chasing with doing my blog, where I was like, writing, I had 50,000 followers, I had 4,000 email subscribers, I wrote for Focus on the Family, and I did all these great things. I really, really wanted to bring people to Jesus, and I really wanted to share my story. And the furniture, the craziest thing is, like, the Lord can use anything. The furniture business actually has brought me to a generation who would not step into a church. And, we've got a lot of millennials and people in Austin that will listen to me on Instagram, but they will, they're not going to step into a church, and they'll be inspired by my story, and they'll hear me talk about the goodness of God and how he continues to show up. And I'm reaching more people now with vintage furniture than I ever was writing a Christian blog. And so, and now I'm like on podcasts, and I'm, right. So now the running for Mrs. Texas has just been kind of just the culmination of all of that. And it's helping me really like refine my platform and talk about my views, talk about my story. And I'm just watching God unfold this like a beautiful gift. And and a lot of people will say, "Oh, your story is so awesome." And I'm like, I am like living this story, but it's a constant gift to me as I'm like unfolding and watching God, because it's like it's not me, it's God. Like I'm just sitting here, like receiving. Um, but I also want to encourage people that like their own lives are this beautiful unfolding of a story, and encourage women to share their own hurts and pains and how God has used those painful moments to grow them into the people who they are supposed to be.
That's beautiful. And one Bible verse that I talk a lot about with my women is Psalm 127:1, and it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." And so that really parallels well with what you were trying to build with your blogging, and what you thought the path was. And God's like, nope, furniture, come over here. And he just totally flips the script. And that's how he is as the miracle worker and the way maker. And, he makes the crooked path straight. And it's beautiful to hear stories like that. And reflecting back on all the wonderful stuff that you've shared with us in this episode, your path could have been very different, starting out from when you were 11-year-old child. And it's almost like I'm getting this visual that he kind of put you in this safe keeping space. Like you ventured off, but then he never stopped pursuing you. Like he left the 99 for you and showed up for you in the most graceful, loving Abba Father way. Like, thank you for coming home. And I'm so glad you're here, not meeting you with condemnation and how could you, and you've ruined everything. Like I love you, and I'm so glad that you came home. And that is a huge message for anybody going through abuse of some sort. And it typically does, like it can take a while for it to show up as we, if you're abused as a young child, and as you start to come to and realizing all that's happened to you, we can turn to other things, but that doesn't mean that God's going to stop pursuing you either.
Absolutely.
So what would you offer? Well, first of all, I have two questions. The first one is, what would you offer up to a woman or a young girl or a teenager who is in the space where you were when you were the bride of Satan coming into this place? You you reached your rock bottom. What would you offer to encourage a woman who is in that dark space?
Well, so I definitely want to address the fact that if you're in a situation where you feel groomed, I want to kind of paint a picture of what that looks like. So grooming is being manipulated into a situation that makes you feel kind of responsible for what you're doing, because we have autonomy, we have choices we can make. But when you're groomed, it can feel very much like I don't want to tell someone because I'm kind of a willing party to it, even though you are being manipulated into it. One of the people that I have been really thinking about lately, and I had heard her talk about her testimony, is Joyce Myers being abused by her dad. And she was sharing that same idea, is that when she was raped by her dad over 200 times before she turned 18, it was never by force. It was a mental manipulation where she was being, in that situation. And so it can really do a really big number on our minds because we feel very responsible when really we were too young to have that type of responsibility laid on us. So if you're in that situation, realize that you can tell someone, you can tell a parent, you can tell a friend, and that you know, I understand that you can feel responsible, but when you are being manipulated, you're not responsible for the in the way that you think you're responsible. And so don't ever be scared to bring truth to the light, because when truth is brought to the light, it only brings healing. And if you're in a dark place that's, drugs or alcohol or depression or suicidal thoughts, knowing always that, emotions are like a temporary feeling and that they're not necessarily the truth. Like there's reality and then there's the truth. And so your reality might look really dark and scary, but the truth is that God can come in and miraculously make a way where there is no way. And to just hang on to that hope that just because you don't see a way out doesn't mean that there isn't a way out. And so that's what I would offer to young women that are stuck in a dark place right now.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. And coming on the end of what you said. So as moms, how can we, what are some ways that, what are some signs that we can look for? God forbid that our daughters enter a situation like what you experienced, or maybe a friend down the street, or, what are some things that we can do as sisters in Christ to have our eyes open to come alongside young girls that are being groomed?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually had a family friend that I was suspicious of from a very at the beginning. And unfortunately, we found out that he was, in fact, um, very violently molesting someone very near to us that was a young girl, not my family. But there were signs. Number one, I knew he looked at porn. Number two, he would offer my children extravagant gifts, like that were just beyond normal people gifts. Even when he was single, and then when he got married, and um, and then like just the attention that someone will bring, like normal men, normal people, when they have kids around, like they're like, oh, you're so sweet, you're so cute, but like then there's like this strange attention, like just I mean, and some people really do love kids, and you can't be as suspicious of everybody, but it's like an over attention to the children and a constant like, oh, I'll babysit them, I'll take care of them, just offering like, oh, you're going out of town, let me take care of them. And just being really, really suspicious of somebody who just seems a little too good to be true, because they usually are. And I am we do not allow spend the nights. I feel like everything that's fun at a sleepover happens before 1 a.m. And then everything else afterwards, like you wake up at 9 a.m. and you're at someone's house and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go home. Like there are weird pancakes and stuff like that. Like, was it? So I will, make sure to go. I'll pick them up at 2 a.m. if they want me to pick them up at 2 a.m., but we don't do sleepovers. And, we make sure that we are constantly aware of, their surroundings, but also just making them aware. And there's a saying that says, better, those that are prepared will be spared. And so if you prepare your children to make sure that they know, like, no one is supposed to touch your areas, this is not okay, this type of behavior is not okay. If you ever feel uncomfortable, make sure you tell me. If someone says, if you tell mommy or daddy I'm going to hurt you, know that that's, I absolutely, they will not hurt you, I will protect you. Just making sure that they know all the things. I'm probably more of an oversharer with my children, but you can do it in the way that you feel comfortable with as a parent, just making sure that they're prepared for the eventual or the potential happening in when they're dealing with anybody. And then also telling, like, just because it's in the church or at school or uncle so and so or at Thanksgiving, like, doesn't mean that it can't happen there. And so as a parent, when Thanksgiving happens or Christmas happens, and the kids are all running off at different rooms, like, I'm over there checking. And I, I remember feeling like, oh, I'm just like a crazy person. And then when it came out that the person close to our family had been doing that, I was like, and I wasn't. I was not a crazy person. I was right on track. And I'm so glad that I constantly was checking to make sure where my kids were. And then also, just making sure that the kids know that it doesn't always have to be somebody that's like a lot older. It also could be somebody that's like, 15 and they're 7, and so making sure that, they just know the rules of where their body is and what their, that what consent is and everything like that.
Yeah, yeah. Those are wonderful, wonderful tips. And also just continuing to breathe the truth of the scriptures into them. Um, that their
Well, and
body is the holy temple.
absolutely, and praying, like praying over the kids specifically for that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, the Lord restores the years that the locusts have destroyed, and He has absolutely done that for you. And um, you chose Him. He never stopped pursuing you, and then when you were faced with making a choice, you chose Him. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
Are there any other closing thoughts? Like, how can people get in touch with you? How can people support you? If somebody is listening to this and they say, oh my goodness, I know someone who this is happening to, or this has happened to me, or I think this is happening, how can they get in touch with you?
So my like personal like speaker page, my podcast page is elainemingus.com. And I am releasing a ebook tomorrow, talking about Speak on Purpose, which is just kind of a walking you through on how to be a better speaker. And I'll be having a course on how to speak and make sure that your message is clear and concise. And then if you are looking for vintage furniture, you can always find me at curvevulture.com or curvevulture on Instagram. My personal page is on Instagram is Elaine Mingus Official. And yeah, right now I'm just collecting pageant sponsors. So if you're somewhere in the Texas area and you you want to come sponsor me for Mrs. Texas, and potentially if I win Mrs. USA, or sorry, Mrs. America, you can contact me there. Or if you have any questions or comments or concerns, definitely, reach out.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for being here today. I know that the Lord is going to put this in the ears of the exact women or people who need to hear this. So thank you.